So, with that, I'm gonna show some data. I want you guys to know that there is gonna be a QR code and a website at the end. It is gonna have all of the 50 state data for all of the horse races I'm about to show you, high resolution graphics, so on, so don't feel like you need to write down numbers. And we'll give you guys a chance to digest it all and then can answer your questions over the next week or two. So first, based on this 26,000 person, 0.6% margin of error poll, if the election were to be held today and the only two candidates were President Biden and President Trump, this is what CNN's magic wall would look like tomorrow. President Trump wins handily by a 50 electoral vote margin. And congratulations, you have woken up in a world where you have 4 more years of chaos and division and arguing with your neighbors, massive inflationary spending, and if there's another emergency, maybe another round of shutting down all of America's businesses. So, given that the DNC was shown over and over during the primary, polling that demonstrated that RFK could beat Donald Trump in a general, and still chose to back President Biden, what is their plan for beating Donald Trump in November? Well, maybe they plan to, weaponize the courts and pull a hat trick and force Trump out of the race. It's unlikely, but let's say they did. What would happen? So we ran that scenario too, and here's what the magic wall on CNN would look like in that scenario. Kennedy wins in a landslide by a margin of 96 electoral vote. In fact, Biden only wins 11 states in this scenario, and RFK becomes our next president with the most bipartisan mandate in our lifetimes, drawing votes from across the political spectrum. How healing would that be? Viva Kennedy. And yet, I think given that Donald Trump seems to be pouring all of his donor dollars into his legal defense, and the courts seem to have retained a shred of their apolitical objectivity, I think we can all agree that Trump dropping out is pretty unlikely. So, is there any scenario in which President Trump participates in the election and doesn't win it? Yes, there is exactly one. And that scenario is that President Biden acknowledges that he cannot win, not in a 2-way, not in a 3-way. We ran them both, and makes good on his 2020 pledge not to seek re-election, and allows Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to beat President Trump and save us all 4 years that we dread. Now, I realize that it might seem preposterous to suggest that a candidate should drop out just because they can't win, and by being in the race, they're preventing someone who could win from doing so. I might even agree with you. But the DNC does not think it's preposterous. In fact, the DNC has been demanding that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. drop out of this race in the name of saving democracy from Donald Trump since the moment that he stepped up to offer Americans an alternative to the last 8 years of driving America in the wrong direction. The DNC surrogates have said over and over on every television show that will give them airtime that Bobby Kennedy is a spoiler and it is time for him to drop out to save our nation from the terror of Donald Trump. So let's take another look at this term spoiler. As you heard earlier, the term spoiler requires two components to fulfill. One, you can't win. Two, by staying in the race, you prevent someone else who can win from doing so. Now, clearly, based on this 26,000 person, 0.6% margin of error data set, by far the most comprehensive data set that we have on this election, all told, this cycle, Kennedy does not fulfill that definition, because whatever you might believe about his chances in a three-way, President Biden cannot win. He can't win in a two-way, and he can't win in a three-way, so nobody can be a spoiler in that scenario because they're not preventing someone from winning who could otherwise. President Biden, however, does fulfill the definition of a spoiler. He cannot win in either scenario, and by being in the race, he prevents the only person who can beat Donald Trump from doing so in November. How do you like them apples? So, the question is, will President Biden heed the dire pleas of the DNC, and as the spoiler responsible for handing Trump the election, bow out and let Bobby beat Trump and save democracy? Or will he hand the country back over to Donald Trump out of stubbornness? Now, maybe he thinks he's got plenty of time, right? It's 6 months out from the election. 6 months is a long time in politics, especially when you have as much money to spend on advertising as the DNC does. But let's just examine that for a minute. President Biden is the sitting president of the United States. He has the biggest bullhorn in the entire world, and he's had it for over 3 years. He's also spent $46 million on advertising already this cycle. $46 million while Americans are staying up at night trying to figure out how to pay for their groceries. We've spent around $2 million, and most of that has been in service of signature collection to even get on the ballot, which President Biden doesn't have to spend anything on. So given that his campaign has outspent ours by more than 20 to 1, has this boosted his support? Could we see this as an indicator that more spending to come could reverse what we've just seen? Well, let's take a look. So, starting with a website. Here we are, more monthly website visits, but not just that as a metric, all the metrics. We have more visits, we have longer visit duration, we have more pages per visit, we have a lower bounce rate, more page views, more engagements. There are several more pages after this, but I'm sparing you. Not everyone uses websites anymore. Some people rely on social media. Maybe that's where his advertising dollars are really shining. So Bobby and our campaign outperform Biden's campaign in both engagement and growth on every single platform. So not showing up on social media either. And you really have to ask yourself in this scenario, okay, so if spending 20 to 1 against your competition leaves your competition gaining on you in every way, maybe they're just planning to rely on President Biden turning up a charm offensive. He's got 6 months. He can convince voters to change their mind and vote for him in that time, right? The challenge there is that in August of 2023, 77% of Americans believed that President Biden was too old to seek re-election. And now 86% of Americans believe that President Biden is too old to seek re-election. At that rate, by November, it'll be near unanimous. And this isn't a disrespectful thing to say, and it isn't a disrespectful thing to consider. President Biden has given decades of public service to this country. And whether or not you agree with the decisions he made during that time, there is no debating that record of public service. And the natural toll of age comes on us all, don't we know it? But the Kennedy family, more than most, knows that a nuclear exchange is not impossible. Right? False alarms happen. You remember in Hawaii a few years ago, everyone got the text message that said, seek cover, nuclear inbound, say goodbye to your loved ones. And that was a mishap of the alert system, thank God. But in those moments, the President of the United States has 6 minutes, woken up in the middle of the night by Secret Service, being shuffled down the hall, gotten to safety in the most terrible physical, mental, emotional duress that you can possibly imagine. 6 minutes to decide whether or not to return fire. And with all of the beautiful checks and balances of our government, that is the one moment where the lives of my kids and the lives of your kids can be taken by one person in one single act in the blink of an eye. We can lose everything, all of human civilization, dependent on the judgment and the recall and the mental acuity of a single human being. And Americans know that. They know that underneath all of the media jamboree, that is the one most consequential, sacred responsibility of the American presidency. And knowing that, they think it's fair to ask whether the person who has that responsibility should be someone that, with sincere respect, I couldn't leave babysitting my 2-year-old while I went to the movies. It's true, it's true. So if that question isn't going away, in fact, is only going to get progressively more urgent, and all the money that they've spent on social media and on websites, and by the way, their digital team is sharp. They have some great people over there. So all those great people, all of this $46 million they've already spent, all of the data that we have around YouTube referrals and social media engagement and website visits, none of that has moved the needle. How is President Biden going to beat President Trump in November? The answer is he can't. And by the DNC's own diktat, that means President Biden needs to do what he said he would do in 2020. He needs to fulfill his promise not to seek re-election, step aside so Bobby Kennedy Jr.